Good afternoon. It's 2 p.m. Central Time, January the 26th, 2019. You are listening to the podcast Altitude Adjustment, and I'm your host, Leon Davis. I want to thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. First off, I want to mention, I think it was a couple of podcasts ago, and it might have been last podcast, but I didn't have a chance to run back and double check. But I had mentioned that I thought patrolling the border, and this was during talking about the issue of immigration, but patrolling the border can be done by drone. And I had mentioned at the time that I had not heard about drones being mentioned as an option for patrolling the border. And since that podcast, I have at least run across information that a couple of years ago or a year or so ago, Congress had passed legislation to fund or had passed funding for immigration, and included in that was using drone technology to help patrol the border. So I did want to just mention that because I hadn't heard of it, but it appears that they had considered that option and decided to actually use it, but it doesn't seem to be implemented, or at least I haven't heard any information about it being implemented. What I want to talk about today is wealth inequality. And wealth inequality in the United States is also known as the wealth gap. It is the unequal distribution of assets among residents of the United States. Now, wealth includes the value of your home, automobile, personal valuables, businesses, savings, and investments. Now, it's important to not confuse income inequality with wealth inequality, though income inequality has to be included in the discussion of wealth inequality. But I don't plan to touch much on income inequality this afternoon, so I'm mostly going to stick to wealth inequality. Get all those things mixed up. And that's coming up right now. Welcome to Altitude Adjustment. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time to join me this afternoon. When I started the day putting together my opening for this podcast, I looked out. I noticed outside it was pretty cloudy. Actually overcast, and there was no sun. Now the sun is at least coming out, but the temperature was 33 degrees. And so my science question for the day was: does ice, and that's water that's frozen that doesn't contain any other chemicals, start to change back into a liquid at 33 degrees? Because 33 degrees outside, and we know that, or we at least accept that water freezes at 32. So the assumption is that at 33, water should start to melt. But I just put that question out there, and someone may have some information that they'd like to add to that, or there may be some conditions that affect that. But we're going to move on to wealth inequality. Now, I'm going to share with you a few wealth facts about wealth in the United States, and I'm going to try not to lean too heavily on facts and data, as far as giving you facts, but at least sticking to a discussion that is factually based. So the median household income in the U.S. in 2016 was about $59,039. That's the median income. That's median being from lowest, the middle between the lowest and the highest, not necessarily zero. Total net worth of U.S. households and nonprofit organizations was $94 $1.7 trillion in the first quarter of 2017. Now, if you divide that equally among 124 million U.S. households, that comes out to $760,000 of wealth per family. Of course, we know that that's not the case, but if all things were equal, each household would have a value of $760,000. Now, according to Robert Reich, who consulted on the economics in multiple administrations, I think through the two Bush administrations, Clinton, and Barack Obama. According to Robert Reich, 95% of the economic gains since 2009 have gone to the top 1%. You might have heard a lot about that. There's been quite a bit of discussion in the news about that, but I just wanted to share that fact. And wealth is usually not used for daily expenditures or factored into household budgets, but combined with income, it comprises the family's total opportunity to secure a desired stature and standard of living, or pass their class status along to their children. Moreover, wealth provides for both short and long-term financial security. It bestows social prestige and contributes to political power, and can be used to produce more wealth. Now, the wealthiest families may have low income, but the value of their assets earn enough money to support their lifestyle. Dividends from trusts or gains in the stock market do not fall under the definition of income, but are the primary money flows for the wealthy. And I particularly want to go back over that point, that wealth created a generation ago for some families means that, or a couple of generations ago, means that if there's a possibility that the future generations don't have to actually perform any work in order to maintain a high lifestyle, to become part of what we have termed an elite group. So with those facts, one of the questions that I have is, do we maintain a how did I phrase that? Do we maintain a permanent upper class? So keeping in mind, if I were to be extremely successful at something and I generated quite a bit of wealth, then passing that wealth off to my offspring or family members, and they pass it down and they pass it down, and these family members, there's enough wealth there that there's residual income generated from stock ownership or ownership in a company or something where they don't actually have to go out and produce and generate wealth. Wealth is continually generated by the original wealth, and so they pass that on to their children and they pass it on to their children. So how far down does that wealth transition and maintain its status? So by the mechanism of transferring my wealth to my heirs or to my family, there can be created a permanent upper class. So if we've talked, there's been a lot of talk about the mobility of citizens in America to be able to move from middle class to upper class, from non-working to working, and how they generate wealth and live better than their parents. So one of the questions there are a couple of ways I think that we as a society have to look at how we build our society, and one is what we, how legally we should approach wealth, and how morally we should approach wealth. How do we make sure that we maintain? All right. Anyway, my little lady likes to come and hang out with me from time to time, so she decided to today. Anyway, so as I said, the question then becomes, what is our expectations of how our society treats its citizens? Now, when I talk about, so in the discussion of wealth, you will hear people talk about that the government should not be in the business of redistributing wealth. Well, government has been in the business of redistributing wealth since we became a society. So through tax laws, through what we make illegal, what we make legal, all of those laws affect how wealth is distributed and how it's maintained. So the argument of we don't want government redistributing wealth is a bad argument, because there is no way to not redistribute wealth, or even to, if laws protect wealth, that is still the government redistributing wealth. So we as a society have to determine, how does government, so the question really isn't should government or does government play a role in the redistribution of wealth? It's how does government play a role in the redistribution of wealth? What kind of things do we protect? Do we value work income over capital gains income? And recently, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talked about a 70% marginal tax rate. And so people got up in arms, because what the first thing that they say to you is being taxed at 70%. So most people look at what they're making, and they say, you're going to take 70% of that, and then I have to live off of that. But what she's talking about is at a certain point, in the process of income, what becomes excessive and what becomes necessary for survival, or necessary to live, or if you did not, so dividend income and income from capital gains is not necessarily something you worked for. It is something that you invested in, and how much of that, how that investment should be taxed, it is going to have an impact on how you live. But is it because it's excessive, or is it because of being able to manage, to avoid having a permanent upper class where people never, the family or never exited the upper class? And we know how wealth is spent here in the United States, it's used for political clout. It's used for business clout. It's used to arrest the opportunities of others while excelling my opportunity to make more money. And the idea is, how do we make that fair so that all people have an opportunity to move into a more comfortable financial position and be treated fairly. So we want to try to make the tax code and how we as a society look at wealth and wealth equality and make sure that we're doing what we can to even level the playing field and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to participate and everyone has an opportunity to gain benefit from it. So it has to be looked at as society as a whole and not just as an individual. Like I'm going to be taxed at 70% of my income. Well, your whole income is not taxed at 70%. And so that's what has to be recognized first, so that we don't emotionally react to the concept of a 70% tax rate. And then some people try to justify it by saying, we've done it before and it worked. And so what we know by that meaning that we can do this and not break the system as it stands, and that it can be done fairly, or at least it can be done where the system functions. I think we still need to define what is fair. How do we define, what is good income, what is bad income? Just the idea that you make income does not necessarily mean that it's good or fair income. If you are a large business and you use unfair trade practices or unfair practices, and you're the owner of that business, and you have unfair practices, you then have used your position to keep someone else from their earning potential while raising your earning potential. And now that you've made that income, you can pass it on forever, in thought, in theory, that you can continue to pass it on forever. So those people in your family after you continue to benefit from that, and it was not gained in an ethical manner. So that's one of the things that I think we have to consider when we're having the discussion about income inequality, and I think that that's important. When I talk about businesses, one of the things that concerns me is businesses are getting, so we have this, and I don't want to get off into the educational system, but we're making the educational system a part of, or there are attempts to make the educational system a part of wealth and wealth accumulation. So they're saying we need workers that have skill sets. So they're starting, or at least some companies are working with K through 12 to try to teach skills. Now they're teaching business skills for a particular job before children or even have any idea what they want to do in life. So it's almost like steering children into jobs before they've had an opportunity to at least experience what being a kid is, being a child is. So I have some concerns about companies working with the educational system, providing anything more than maybe just resources for the educational system to better implement what they've deemed as important for children to know. And if we focus on business aspects in the K through 12, then they become schools for business. And so I think we have to look at, is that really what we want? Do we want businesses determining curriculums at schools? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I'm sure I got her name right, and I did talk about the 70% marginal tax rate. Now, as I said, the government redistribution of wealth occurs in the tax code. It occurs in laws. So we have laws that govern insider trading. That is, if there was no law governing insider trading, then insider trading would be legal. People who had information to that would then gain a foot up on everyone, have an opportunity to make more money and avoid losing money at the expense of those people who did not have that information and cannot benefit from that and protect their wealth or accumulate additional wealth. So the government plays a role in wealth redistribution. And it is important to understand that and not be afraid of that, but more determine what role government should have in the redistribution of wealth. And so how do we start to have that discussion? Another aspect, and I had mentioned earlier about money influencing politics. So we have a system where one person, one vote, where money changes that equation. It changes and gives some people greater influence over politics than someone else. And where companies are allowed to have lobbyists that get an opportunity to be heard where other citizens are not quite heard. Their voice isn't quite as amplified as a lobbyist. Now, not all companies are family owned. Some companies are corporations. Some corporations don't have a particular owner per se, but are owned by a group. And there are a small number of people. When you think of how many people are on the planet and how many people control business, there are a small number of people that have an opportunity to influence legislation that's going to benefit them at the expense of other citizens who don't have the influence that a company has. And so I think it's important that we examine how we handle business and businesses' influence in politics and in how things operate within our society as a whole. And I think we address that to some degree when we contact companies and we protest, and we see some of that response coming back at us. But my concern is are they responsive enough to the average citizen, and should they be more responsible? Some of the examples of companies that eschew responsibility is the tech giants, especially Facebook, which so the whole difficulty that they've experienced through 2018 all hurt, or in some way the brunt of the problem was felt by the community, while Facebook enriched itself. And I'm not, that they're just an example and I don't want to make them the poster child for that, but they are an example of how a company, a few people benefit, whereas Facebook is a corporation. Yet, when the corporation was created, Mark Zuckerberg and the other, and her name slips me right now, but because they were majority, the way the stock was set up, their main beneficiaries, they have control over most of the decisions. So they decide and define a public company, and they determine what its response is to everyday life, to any legal challenges. It comes down to the hands of a few who have control over the levers of the company and how it interacts with the public. And I think that that's important. One of the concerns about having a permanent upper class is if we have a permanent upper class and there are people who never have to work, who never know paycheck to paycheck, never know having their electricity disconnected or having their gas disconnected or being one flat tire away from having your car taken from you or ever having to make a payday loan. If there are people who've never worked like that, who've never experienced that, they're going to have probably a difficult time relating to that. So their expectations and how they define and carry out business is going to reflect that. And one of the examples that I have of that is the gentleman that owned a payday loan and was, I just watched on Netflix. They have a special called Dirty Money, and I encourage you to watch it. It's just another source of information. And the gentleman owned a payday loan company, and in the course of having a payday loan company, there were laws against payday loans in a couple of states, and so he couldn't operate within that state. They got around it by an interesting set of maneuvers, and I'm going to leave you to do a little research on that. Some people may know about it, some people may not. But they know they've done a set of unique maneuvers in order to get around that and still do business. And his argument was he was a businessman doing business, and he should have been allowed to continue to do that because all he was doing was pursuing the American dream of carving out for himself his place in society. And I think it's important to understand that making money and doing it in an ethical way has to be just as important as carving out a place for yourself in society, doing what you do. I'm going to close on this statement. And we are a self-governing society. That's the beauty of democracy, our constitutional republic. So we determine how society works and who it works for. Now, one of the major questions I believe we need to answer is there an argument for a permanent upper class? There are many examples throughout history that we can examine to make this determination. There is data that says only 30% of registered voters participate in the voting process on a regular basis. It is estimated that about 24,000 or 51 million eligible voters are not registered to vote here in the United States. Now, while the voting process may not be a first choice for making change in our society, it should most definitely be a choice. There are many societal questions that we need to answer, and everyone's participation is absolutely important to building a better community that serves everyone. So I encourage you to get out and participate. My attempt at putting this podcast together is just an opportunity to try to bring some information to light, to at least begin to ask those questions that I think we need to examine to try to build a better society. And I hope that I am accomplishing that, and your help is always appreciated. So this podcast is streamed live each week on YouTube. So you are encouraged to participate by questions and including your thoughts. To participate, contact Altitude Adjustment by connecting via Skype at thelionsden.stl@gmail.com or on Google at thelionsden.stl@gmail.com. Please feel free to contact me on Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, and on YouTube. Be sure to look out for, be sure that you're looking out or looking for this episode and other episodes where you listen to podcasts. Your likes and shares are internet gold, so like and share this podcast where you find it. Be cool, be calm, and above all, be careful. Look out for the other guy because they may not be looking out for you.